The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the dark void between star systems. Its crystal walls sparkled with lights from thousands of windows. Inside the main chamber, representatives from 12 different alien species sat around a huge circular table. The air buzzed with tension as translators worked to convert dozens of different languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Li Jihan walked through the long hallway toward the chamber doors. His black diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed, and his face showed no emotion. At 45 years old, he had spent 20 years dealing with alien politics. He had seen wars start over simple misunderstandings and peace treaties fall apart because of wounded pride. Today felt different, though. Today felt dangerous. The doors opened with a soft hiss. Every eye in the chamber turned to watch him enter. The Vorthak delegation sat to his left, tall reptilian beings with green scales and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. Their leader, Chancellor Krestal, watched Jihan with the same look a snake gives a mouse. Across from them sat the Chitauri, insect-like creatures with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected light like broken mirrors. Their clicking language sounded like angry typewriters. The Lumians floated in their special chairs, their translucent bodies glowing with soft blue light. They claimed to be the most peaceful species in the galaxy, but Jihan knew better. The other species filled the remaining seats. Each group looked at him with different expressions. Some showed curiosity, others showed contempt. A few looked almost bored, as if this meeting was just a waste of their time. Ambassador Li Jihan of the Terran Federation announced the chamber's computer system. Please take your assigned seat. Jihan walked to the single chair marked with Earth's symbol, a simple blue circle with green continents. It sat alone, on one side of the table facing all the others. The message was clear. Humanity stood alone. The chamber fell silent as Matriarch Velnari of the Lumians began to speak. Her voice was musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. We gather today to address a serious matter. The human species has begun expanding into territories that belong to the galactic community. This expansion violates several treaties and threatens the peace we have maintained for centuries. Jihan listened without changing expression. He had expected this. For months, Earth's colonies in the Outer Rim had been growing. New worlds were being settled. New trade routes were being established. And the old powers of the galaxy didn't like it. Chancellor Krestal leaned forward, his forked tongue tasting the air. The humans forget their place. 50 years ago, they begged to join our council. They promised to follow our rules. Now they act like they own the galaxy. Several other delegates nodded in agreement. The Krex commander, Zontar, slammed one of his 4 fists on the table. They take worlds without permission. They ignore our warnings. They must be stopped. Jihan finally spoke. His voice was calm and measured. Honored delegates, humanity has followed every treaty we signed. We have respected every boundary you established. Our expansion has been into unclaimed territory. Unclaimed by you, perhaps, hissed Krestal. But those systems have been reserved for future development by more deserving species. Deserving? Jihan raised an eyebrow. And who decides what makes a species deserving? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The truth was that the galactic powers had always decided among themselves who could expand where and when. Newer species like humanity were expected to wait their turn. That turn might never come. Matriarch Velnari's glow brightened slightly, a sign of irritation. The order of the galaxy has existed for thousands of years, Ambassador. It has brought peace and prosperity to countless worlds. Peace for some, Jihan replied quietly. Prosperity for fewer. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. The translation system struggled to keep up, creating a babble of overlapping voices. Through it all, Jihan sat quietly, his hands folded on the table before him. When the noise finally died down, Chancellor Krestal spoke with cold authority. The Council has reached a decision. Humanity will withdraw from all disputed territories within 30 standard days. All human settlements in the Outer Rim will be abandoned or transferred to proper authority. All human ships will return to Earth-controlled space. And if we refuse? Jihan asked. Then corrective action will be taken, Vilnari said. Her musical voice had lost its gentle tone. The peace of the galaxy must be maintained. Jihan looked around the chamber, meeting each delegate's gaze in turn. Some looked eager for conflict. Others seemed almost sad that it had come to this. A few couldn't meet his eyes at all. I request a 72-hour recess to consult with my government, Jihan said. Granted, Crestal replied immediately. But do not mistake our patience for weakness, human. The decision will not change. Jihan stood and bowed slightly, the minimum respect required by protocol. I understand completely, Chancellor. The decision has indeed been made. He walked out of the chamber with the same calm dignity he had shown entering. But as the doors closed behind him, several delegates noticed something in his tone. The human hadn't sounded defeated. He had sounded almost satisfied. Jihan made his way back to his ship, a small diplomatic vessel docked on the station's outer ring. His aide, a young woman named Yun Nari, was waiting with a worried expression. Sir, how did it go? Exactly, as we expected, Jihan replied, settling into his chair. Open a secure channel to Earth. Priority 1 encryption. The holographic display activated, showing the familiar face of Director Park Minji. Behind her stood Admiral Kim Hyunwoo, his scarred face grim with concern. Both had been waiting for this call. Well? Park asked without preamble. 30 days to withdraw from the Outer Rim, or they take corrective action, Jihan reported. No negotiation, no compromise. They've made their position clear. Admiral Kim stepped forward. What about our people in those colonies? Millions of civilians? They don't care, Jihan said simply. To them, we're just another problem to be solved. Park leaned back in her chair, her face thoughtful. Then we need to make our position clear as well. Are you ready for what comes next? Jihan looked out the viewport at the glittering space station. Somewhere inside, 12 species were probably celebrating their easy victory over the upstart humans. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. I've been ready for 20 years, he said. The question is, are they ready for us? 3 days later, Li Jihan walked back into the council chamber. The alien delegates sat in the same positions as before, but their mood was different. They looked relaxed, almost bored. Some were talking quietly among themselves. A few were reviewing data on their personal devices. They had obviously expected the human to return with surrender terms. Chancellor Crestal didn't even look up when Jihan entered. Ambassador, I trust you have come to accept our generous terms. I have come to make a presentation to the full council, Jihan replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. This got their attention. Matriarch Velnari's glow flickered with surprise. A presentation? We have already reached our decision. I request the right to address this body before that decision is finalized, Jihan said formally. According to council rules, any member species may present evidence relevant to proceedings. The delegates looked at each other uncertainly. It was an old rule, rarely used, but it was still valid. After a brief discussion in several languages, Crestal nodded with obvious irritation. Very well. You have 10 minutes. Thank you. Jihan walked to the center of the chamber and activated a holographic projector. Honored delegates, you speak of maintaining order, of correcting the course of a species that has overstepped its bounds. Before we proceed, I believe you should understand exactly what order you wish to preserve. The first image appeared in the air above the table. It showed a crowded marketplace, but something was wrong. The beings buying and selling weren't trading goods. They were trading people. Sentient beings stood in chains while others examined them like livestock. This is Vorthak Colony 7, Jihan said quietly. Last month, Chancellor Cressital rose from his seat, his scales darkening with anger. How dare you spy on sovereign Vorthak territory? The next image, Jihan continued without responding to the outburst. A new scene appeared. It showed a laboratory where Chitari scientists were testing weapons on living subjects. The victims weren't soldiers or volunteers. They were civilians from primitive worlds, beings who had barely discovered fire being used as test subjects for advanced biological weapons. The Chitauri delegate began clicking rapidly in their native language. The translation system struggled to clean up the stream of curses and threats. And this, Jihan said, bringing up a third image. The new scene was the most disturbing yet. It showed what looked like a beautiful garden world, but the plants and buildings were made from something that wasn't quite plant and wasn't quite mineral. As the image zoomed in, the horrible truth became clear. The structures were made from processed, sentient beings, their consciousness still intact, but their bodies transformed into living building materials. The Lumian purification process, Jihan explained, where entire civilizations are converted into what you call cosmic harmony. Matriarch Velnari's glow had turned from blue to angry red. These are internal matters, sacred processes that outsiders cannot understand. I understand perfectly, Jihan replied. You're right about one thing, these are internal matters, internal to each of your empires, and for 50 years humanity has respected that. We've followed the rules, we've ignored the screams, we've pretended that sovereignty justified anything, no matter how horrible. More images appeared, faster now. Mass graves on dozen worlds. Child soldiers forced to fight in wars they didn't understand. Entire species enslaved to mine resources for their conquerors. Research facilities where sapient beings were bred like animals for experimentation. But you want to know what else we've been doing for 50 years? Jihan asked. The images changed. Now they showed human ships arriving at refugee camps. Human doctors treating victims of alien conflicts. Human engineers rebuilding worlds that had been devastated by what the Council called internal matters. While you debated the proper order of things, we've been saving the people you threw away, Jihan continued. While you discussed sovereignty, we've been providing sanctuary. While you maintained your precious peace, we've been dealing with the consequences of your wars. Commander Zontar of the Krex slammed the table again. You have no right, no authority. You're absolutely correct, Jihan agreed. We have no authority. That's why we've been asking for permission. That's why we've followed your rules. That's why we've limited ourselves to unclaimed space. He paused, looking around the chamber. Every delegate was staring at him now, their earlier boredom replaced by anger and something that might have been fear. But you've just told us that we can't even do that. You've decided that humanity should remain in our single star system while the rest of the galaxy burns. You've made it clear that the order you want to preserve is one where might makes right and the strong prey on the weak without consequence. The holographic display showed new images now. These weren't scenes of horror or rescue operations. They were intelligence reports, detailed information about every empire represented in the chamber. Military strengths and weaknesses, economic vulnerabilities, political instabilities. How did you get this information? Krestal hissed. The same way we got the images of your slave markets, Jihan replied calmly. We've been watching. We've been learning. We've been documenting everything. The data was overwhelming. Personnel files from deep inside alien governments. Technical specifications for their most advanced weapons. Economic reports that were supposed to be state secrets. Even personal communications between high-ranking officials. This is impossible, Velnari whispered. Our security systems are impenetrable. To each other, perhaps, Jihan said. But you've never considered that a primitive species like humanity might have developed different methods, different technologies, different approaches. More data flowed across the display. It showed human colonies in the outer rim, but not the struggling settlements the Council expected. These were thriving worlds with advanced infrastructure, orbital, shipyards producing vessels with designs unlike anything in the galactic database, agricultural worlds feeding populations across dozens of systems. You see, you made a mistake 50 years ago, Jihan continued. You assumed that because we were new to space, we were new to everything. You assumed that because we asked politely, we were weak. You assumed that because we followed your rules, we needed your permission to exist. The display showed Admiral Kim Hyun-woo standing on what appeared to be the bridge of a massive starship. Behind him, through the viewports, thousands of vessels stretched into space. It was a fleet larger than anything the Council had ever assembled. "You assumed," Jihan said softly, "that we were still asking." The chamber fell completely silent. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't been negotiating from weakness. They had been giving warnings from a position of strength that no one had imagined. "For 50 years we've watched your empires commit genocide and call it governance," Jihan continued, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made several delegates shrink back. "For 50 years we've listened to you speak of order while spreading chaos across the galaxy. For 50 years we've held back, hoping you might evolve beyond your current nature." He looked around the chamber one more time, meeting each delegate's gaze. "You haven't." The display went dark. In the sudden quiet, the only sound was the hum of the station's life support systems. 12 of the galaxy's most powerful species sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just learned. Finally, Crestal found his voice. "What do you want?" Jihan smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "That, Chancellor, is the wrong question." The council chamber stayed silent for long moments after Jihan's last words. The alien delegates looked at each other with expressions ranging from shock to fear to barely controlled rage. Finally, Matriarch Velnari broke the silence. "Ambassador, you will retract these accusations immediately. You will apologize to this council for your inflammatory presentation, and you will accept our terms for human withdrawal from disputed space." Jihan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he activated his holographic display again. New images began to appear, but these were different from before. They showed technical specifications, fleet positions, supply routes, and command structures. The level of detail was impossible. "These are our most recent intelligence reports," Jihan said calmly. "Updated as of this morning." High Commander Zontar leaned forward, his four eyes focusing on the data streaming past. "This is classified Krex military information." "How did you obtain it?" "The same way we obtained everything else," Jihan replied. "We asked nicely." A few delegates made sounds that might have been laughter in their species, but the mood in the chamber was far too tense for humor. The data continued to flow, showing intimate details of every empire's military capabilities, economic weaknesses, and political structures. "Your security protocols are quite impressive," Jihan continued conversationally. "Quantum encryption, biogenetic locks, psionic barriers, very sophisticated. They assume you're dealing with species that think like you do, species that approach problems the way you approach problems." The display shifted to show human settlements in the outer rim. But these weren't the primitive colonies the Council had imagined. Advanced cities sprawled across multiple worlds. Massive orbital platforms hung in space like mechanical moons. Industrial complexes produced goods and materials on a scale that dwarfed anything the established empires had built. "You see, you made another assumption about us," Jihan said. "You assumed we were still the same species that came begging for council membership 50 years ago. You assumed we hadn't changed, hadn't grown, hadn't learned." Chancellor Crestal's yellow eyes narrowed to slits. "Impossible. We monitored human space. We tracked your development. You barely had interstellar capability." "You monitored what we wanted you to monitor," Jihan corrected. "You tracked what we allowed you to track. For 50 years, you've been watching a carefully crafted show while the real work happened where you weren't looking." The display now showed Admiral Kim Hyun-woo's image, transmitted live from his command ship. Behind him, the bridge buzzed with activity as hundreds of crew members worked at stations filled with technology that looked nothing like standard galactic designs. "Admiral," Jihan said, "please show our guests the current fleet positions." Kim nodded grimly. The display changed to show a three-dimensional map of local space. Red dots began appearing throughout the region, hundreds of them, then thousands. Each dot represented a human vessel that had been invisible to Council sensors. "Until this moment, we've been here all along," Kim explained, his scarred face serious, "watching every military exercise, monitoring every fleet movement, learning every weakness. The alien delegates began speaking rapidly among themselves in their native languages. The translation system couldn't keep up with the flood of panicked conversations. Several species were already calculating the strategic implications of having their every move observed by a hidden enemy. Enemy, Jihan said, apparently reading their thoughts. That's an interesting word choice. We've never been your enemies. We've simply been preparing for the day you would make that choice inevitable. Director Park Minji's image appeared alongside Admiral Kim's. Behind her, the lights of Earth's orbital stations gleamed like stars. But now the delegates could see that those weren't just civilian platforms. They were military installations, on a scale that boggled the mind. For 30 years we've maintained what we call the silent service, Park explained. While your intelligence agencies focused on each other, we were documenting everything. Every atrocity, every military secret, every political vulnerability. General Choi Dayun appeared on the display, her uniform bearing insignia that no alien had ever seen before. Every slave market, every weapons facility, every command center, we've been there. We know the location of every strategic target in your empires. The full scope of human infiltration was staggering. They hadn't just been watching from the outside. They had been inside every government, every military organization, every intelligence agency. The most secure secrets in the galaxy were open, books to human observers. This is an act of war, Matriarch Velnari exclaimed, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with angry red light. No, Jihan replied calmly. This is an act of preparation. War is what you're about to force us into. More data filled the display. Economic networks, supply chains, communication systems. Humanity had integrated itself into the galaxy's infrastructure at every level. They weren't outsiders looking in. They were part of the system itself, invisible but essential. The refugee ships you've been turning away for decades? Captain Nam Yujin appeared on screen, standing beside a group of beings from a dozen different species. We've been taking them in. The resources you've been hoarding, we've been distributing them. The justice you've been denying, we've been providing it. The captain's image shifted to show massive rescue operations. Human ships arriving at labor camps and slave markets across the galaxy. Prisoners being freed, victims being treated, entire populations being relocated to worlds where they could live in peace. 2 days ago, we liberated 17 forced labor facilities across the Andromeda sector, Nam reported. The workers are now free citizens of human space. Tomorrow, we'll liberate 17 more. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Delegates shouted accusations and demands. Some called for immediate military action. Others were already trying to contact their home governments to warn of the threat. Through the chaos, Jihan's voice cut clear and cold. You want to know what humanity's choice is? We choose to stop asking permission. The noise gradually died, down as the full implications sank in. This wasn't a negotiation, it wasn't even a threat. It was a statement of fact. Humanity had already made their decision, and they had spent 50 years preparing to implement it. You can't do this, Chancellor Crestal hissed. The Council will not allow it. Jihan looked at the Vorthak leader with something that might have been pity. Chancellor, with respect, you've been irrelevant for decades. You just didn't know it. The display showed real-time footage from across the galaxy. Human fleets were emerging from what everyone had thought was empty space, taking positions around major military installations. The precision was terrifying. Every strategic choke point in every hostile empire had been targeted simultaneously. The age of asking permission is over, President Lee Soo-young announced from Earth, flanked by military commanders and government officials. Effective immediately, the Terran Federation claims protection authority over all sentient species suffering under the current galactic order. And if we refuse? Zontar demanded. Admiral Kim smiled grimly. Commander, you're 50 years too late for that choice. The council chamber had descended into chaos. Delegates were screaming at each other in dozens of languages, while their military advisors frantically tried to contact their home fleets. Emergency alarms were beginning to sound throughout the space station as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human ships had appeared everywhere at once, surrounding critical installations with precision that should have been impossible. Through the noise, Dr. Yoon Seohyun's calm voice cut through the confusion. Her image appeared on the main display, showing her in what appeared to be a massive research facility. Behind her, thousands of scientists from dozens of species worked together at advanced computer systems. "Honored delegates," she said, her tone clinical and detached. "You seem confused about how we achieved this level of strategic coordination. Allow me to explain." The display shifted to show a complex diagram mapping the psychology and behavior patterns of every major species in the Council. Each alien race was broken down into detailed profiles showing their decision-making processes, cultural biases, and tactical preferences. "We've spent 50 years studying not just your technologies but your minds," Dr. Yoon continued. "We know exactly how each of your species thinks, fights, and breaks under pressure. More importantly, we know how you'll react to what's happening right now." Chancellor Cressital was indeed reacting exactly as the human analysis predicted. His reptilian features had darkened to almost black, and his forked tongue kept tasting the air in rapid, agitated movements. "You cannot predict the Vorthak Empire. We are masters of warfare. You are masters of intimidating weaker opponents," Dr. Yoon corrected politely. "Your entire military doctrine is based on overwhelming lesser civilizations through superior numbers and technology. You've never faced an enemy that knew your every move before you made it." The display showed real-time tactical analyses of Vorthak fleet movements. Human computers were predicting their responses with terrifying accuracy, sometimes showing the results of Vorthak decisions before the Vorthak commanders had even made them. "The Chitauri prefer biological weapons and swarm tactics," Dr. Yoon continued, addressing the insectoid delegation directly. "But biological weapons are useless against opponents who understand your specific biochemistry better than you do." Images appeared showing human medical teams treating victims of Chitauri weapons. But more disturbing were the technical specifications that followed, detailed breakdowns of exactly how those weapons worked and how to counter them completely. "The Lumians rely on their psychic abilities and claims of moral superiority," Dr. Yoon went on. "Unfortunately for you, humans have developed both psychic shielding and a clear understanding of the difference between actual morality and self-serving propaganda." Matriarch Velnari's bioluminescent skin was now cycling rapidly through colors, betraying her emotional state despite her species' usual control. "This is impossible. No species could have infiltrated our most secure facilities." "Dr. Yoon," Jihan said from the chamber floor, "please show them how we infiltrated their facilities." The display changed to show personnel records from deep inside alien government and military organizations. But these weren't human infiltrators. They were aliens themselves, members of every species in the Council who had chosen to work with humanity instead of their own governments. "You call it infiltration," Dr. Yoon explained. "We call it recruitment. For 30 years we've been offering your own people a simple choice. Continue serving regimes that commit atrocities, or help us build something better." The scope of the defection was staggering. Military officers, government officials, scientists, and intelligence agents from every major empire had been secretly working with humanity for decades. They hadn't been coerced or bribed. They had volunteered. "Why would our own people betray us?" High Commander Zontar demanded, his four fists clenched in rage. "Because," came a new voice from the display, "you gave us reasons to." The speaker was a Krex military commander, but one wearing human uniform insignia. Behind him stood dozens of other aliens, all wearing similar uniforms. They represented every species in the Council. "I am Commander Vexilor, formerly of the Krex, Third Fleet," the alien continued. "I watched my own government use child soldiers in the outer wars. I documented the execution of prisoners who tried to surrender. I reported these war crimes to my superiors and was ordered to remain silent." Other aliens stepped forward, each telling similar stories. A Vorthak scientist who had refused to develop biological weapons for use against civilian populations. A Lumian philosopher who had objected to the purification programs. A Chitauri engineer who had tried to prevent the testing of new weapons on sentient subjects. You want to know why we betrayed our species? Asked a former Vorthak intelligence officer. Because our species had already betrayed everything we were supposed to stand for. The revelation hit the council delegates like a physical blow. It wasn't just that humanity had been watching them. Their own people had been documenting their crimes and helping to plan their downfall. This is why we know everything, Dr. Yoon explained. Your own citizens have been telling us. They've been showing us your weaknesses, your military plans, your political structures. They've been helping us prepare for this day. Admiral Kim reappeared on the display, but now he was flanked by alien officers from multiple species. Every fleet movement you've made in the last 20 years we knew about in advance. Every weapons test, every strategic planning session, every classified communication. We had people in the room taking notes. The tactical display updated to show the current situation across the galaxy. Human fleets had positioned themselves with mathematical precision around every major military installation. But more shocking was what the analysis revealed about the alien fleets themselves. Approximately 40% of your military personnel are ready to defect the moment hostilities begin, Admiral Kim reported matter-of-factly. Another 30% will refuse to fire on human vessels. The remaining 30% will find their weapons mysteriously malfunctioning. Captain Nam Yujin appeared on screen, standing on what was clearly an alien military vessel. But the crew behind her wore human uniforms, and the ship's displays showed human technical interfaces. This is the former Vorthak Dreadnought Dominator, she announced. Surrendered to human forces 6 hours ago by its own crew. It's one of 17 major warships that have voluntarily joined the Terran Federation today. The numbers were devastating. Across the galaxy, alien military units were laying down their weapons or actively joining human forces. Entire colonies were declaring independence from their home governments and requesting human protection. The established order wasn't just being challenged. It was collapsing from within. You're not conquering us, realized Matriarch Velnari, her voice barely above a whisper. You're replacing us. Finally, Jihan said with approval. Someone understands. The display now showed human colonies throughout the galaxy, but these weren't military occupations. They were civilian populations choosing to abandon the old system. Beings from dozens of species were emigrating to human space, seeking citizenship in a government that offered protection instead of oppression. For 50 years, you've ruled through fear and freedom, President Lee Soo-young announced from Earth. We're offering something you never could: hope. The choice between serving masters who see you as expendable or joining a community that values your life and freedom. The response had been overwhelming. Refugee fleets were heading toward human space from every corner of the galaxy. Entire populations were abandoning worlds controlled by council species in favor of human protection. Your corrective action against humanity? Jihan asked, addressing the stunned council. Please proceed. Launch your fleets. See how many of your own people will fight for you versus how many will fight for us. The silence that followed was answer enough. The age of the Galactic Council was ending not with warfare, but with abandonment. The alarms throughout Nexus Prime grew louder as more reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The great space station shuddered slightly as emergency broadcasts filled every communication channel. In the council chamber, the alien delegates sat in stunned silence, watching their empires crumble in real time. Li Jihan stood calmly in the center of the chaos, his hands clasped behind his back. Around him, 12 of the galaxy's most powerful species were learning that their power had been an illusion for decades. The humans hadn't just been preparing to fight them. They had been preparing to make fighting unnecessary. Status report. Admiral Kim announced from the main display. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship buzzed with quiet efficiency. Human fleets have secured orbital positions around all major strategic targets. We've encountered no resistance. Most alien forces have either stood down or actively joined our operations. Chancellor Crestel finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. This is impossible. The Vorthak Empire commands 1,000 worlds. Commanded, Admiral Kim corrected gently. As of an hour ago, 637 of those worlds have requested human protection. The remaining 363 are currently voting on the same measure. The tactical display updated continuously, showing the collapse of established authority across known space. It wasn't happening through conquest or destruction. The old governments were simply being abandoned as their populations chose a different path. Captain Nam Yujin's image appeared alongside the admiral's. She was now standing on the bridge of what had been a Chitauri command vessel, but the insectoid crew had been replaced by a mixed force of humans and aliens working together. The liberation of the forced labor camps is proceeding ahead of schedule, she reported. We've freed over 2 million sentients in the last 6 hours. Most are choosing to emigrate to human space rather than return to their homeworlds. Dr. Yoon Se-hyun joined the communication from her research facility. The psychological profiles were accurate. Each species is responding exactly as predicted. The Vorthak are withdrawing to their core worlds. The Chitauri are fragmenting into competing hives. The Lumians are having philosophical crises about their supposed moral superiority. Indeed, Matriarch Velnari's bioluminescent skin had dimmed to almost nothing. Her musical voice when she finally spoke was hollow and defeated. How long have you been planning this? Since the day we joined your council, Jihan replied honestly. We came to you believing that a galactic civilization must surely be more advanced, more enlightened than a single-world species. We thought, you would teach us how to be better. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that had lost all their earlier arrogance. Instead, you taught us that advancement and enlightenment aren't the same thing. You showed us that it's possible to conquer the stars while remaining primitive in the only ways that matter, so we decided to learn from your mistakes instead of copying them. The display showed images from human colonies throughout the galaxy. But these weren't military installations or government buildings. They were schools where alien children learned, alongside human ones. Hospitals where species that had been enemies for centuries worked together to heal the sick. Research facilities where the greatest minds of dozens of civilizations collaborated on projects that benefited everyone. You built empires, President Lee Soo-young said from Earth. We built communities. You conquered worlds. We invited immigration. You ruled through fear. We governed through consent. High Commander Zontar made one last attempt to salvage something from the disaster. The Krex Empire will never surrender. We will fight to the last warrior. Commander, Admiral Kim said with what might have been sympathy. 3 hours ago, your own son requested asylum in human space. He's currently en route to our nearest embassy with detailed plans of every Krex military installation. He says he's tired of being ashamed of what his people have become. The blow was devastating. Zontar's 4 eyes went wide with shock and something that looked like physical pain. His son, his heir and pride, had chosen the humans over his own father's empire. Why? The Krex commander whispered. Why would he betray his own species? Because, came a familiar voice from the display, some things are more important than species loyalty. The speaker was unmistakably Krex, 4 arms, compound eyes, the distinctive body structure of a warrior caste member. But he wore human, military insignia and stood beside human officers as an equal. I am Colonel Zaktor, son of High Commander Zontar, he announced formally. I hereby renounce my citizenship in the Krex Empire and request recognition as a citizen of the Terran Federation. The personal betrayal broke something in Zontar. The mighty warrior who had terrorized countless worlds seemed to shrink in on himself. Around the chamber, other delegates were receiving similar reports. Children abandoning parents, students rejecting teachers, citizens fleeing governments. This is the end of everything, Matriarch Velnari said, her voice barely audible. Thousands of years of civilization gone. No, Jihan corrected firmly. This is the end of your civilization, the beginning of something better. The display changed to show construction projects on dozens of worlds. Massive cities were rising where slave camps had existed. Spaceports designed for trade and exploration were replacing military installations. Schools and hospitals were being built on worlds that had known only exploitation. Your civilization was based on the belief that strength gives the right to dominate others, Jihan continued. That superior technology justifies any action. That, The weak exist to serve the strong. We're offering a different model. The images showed integrated communities where former enemies worked side by side. Vorthak engineers helping to design Chitauri medical facilities. Lumian philosophers debating ethics with human scholars. Krex warriors, training alongside human peacekeepers to protect the innocent rather than oppress them. A civilization based on cooperation instead of domination, President Lee explained. Where technology serves all citizens, not just the elite. Where strength is measured by what you protect, not what you conquer. The final revelation came when Director Park Minji appeared on the display, flanked by representatives from hundreds of species. Behind them stretched a massive assembly hall filled with delegates from across the galaxy. The new Galactic Assembly has been in session for the past month, she announced. Representatives from over 2,000 worlds have already voted to join the Terran Federation, not as subjects or vassals, but as equal partners in building a better future. The contrast was stark. The old council had 12 species ruling over hundreds of others. The new assembly had thousands of species governing themselves as equals. "You can't do this," Chancellor Crestal hissed, making one final attempt to assert authority. "The treaties, the established order, the law." Jihan smiled sadly at the Vorthak leader. "Chancellor, whose law? The law that says you can own sentient beings? The law that lets you use children as soldiers? The law that permits genocide as long as you call it internal affairs?" He looked around the chamber one final time, meeting each delegate's gaze. "You've left us no choice." The simple words carried more weight than any threat ever could. They weren't spoken in anger or triumph, but with the quiet certainty of someone stating an obvious truth. "For 50 years we tried to work within your system," Jihan continued. "We followed your rules, respected your sovereignty, and hoped you would evolve. But you made it clear that evolution wasn't possible. So we evolved without you." The chamber. Doors opened, and human security officers entered. But they weren't there to arrest anyone. They were there to escort the delegates to transport ships that would take them home to empires that no longer existed. "You're free to return to your core worlds," Jihan told them. "You can try to maintain your old ways among those who still choose to follow you. But the galaxy has moved on. The age of empires is over. The age of community has begun." As the alien delegates filed out of the chamber for the last time, Jihan remained behind for a moment. He looked up at the great crystal dome above, where the stars shone with the light of billions of worlds. Most of those worlds were now choosing a different path, guided by the simple human belief that civilization meant caring for each other, rather than conquering each other. The revolution was complete. It had happened not through warfare or destruction, but through the simple act of offering people something better than what they had. The galaxy would never be the same. And in the quiet of the empty chamber, Li Jihan allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the right choice really was the only choice.